I went and I took the subway. I got the last subway in to the city before they stopped it. And I came out right at 1 Center Street, and everyone was just looking up, and you could see the smoke, and people were crying. And then I decided we really needed to be on the air.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story, a series where New Yorkers talk about their city and how September 11th changed that. I'm Will Thwaites. Throughout the 5 boroughs, many New Yorkers start their day off in exactly the same way, with the sounds of New York Public Radio, WNYC. If New York City had a soundtrack, WNYC would definitely be part of it. The station is one of the oldest radio stations in New York City, with its first official broadcast airing in 1924. It was once owned by the city, but in 1995, then-Mayor Rudolph Giuliani sold WNYC AM/FM to the WNYC Foundation, making it one of the largest independent public radio stations in the country. The woman conducting this whole orchestra, so to speak, is President and CEO Laura Walker, who's been honored with an Edward R. Murrow Award from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the industry's highest honor. Walker's passion for radio and for this city is palpable. A native New Yorker who grew up in the suburbs of Tarrytown, she was constantly traveling to Manhattan to experience the art and culture it had to offer. Here's Walker.
My identity as a New Yorker was very much as an Upper West Sider. So because I spent all that time up at Riverside, and I had a great group of friends, most of whom lived on the Upper West Side, and we would just, take the subway down to actually, to take all the way downtown to take the Staten Island ferry. That would be a Friday night activity. Just walking around Central Park, or, just taking in a cultural event. I did so many. I had a really, really close friend of mine whose dad worked at Lincoln Center. And so we just would, I don't know how we got in free to every single opera, concert, mostly Mozart. We spent one summer, the first summer I think it was of Mostly Mozart, just going to every single Mostly Mozart. It was terrific. Or Shakespeare in the Park, and, kind of waiting online for all day. I fell in love with New York as a New Yorker. And my grandmother was born in Greenpoint. My great-grandmother came here. So I'm a 4th generation New Yorker. My father's from Queens. I'm the real thing.
Yeah, and now you're definitely the real thing in your current role as president and CEO of WNYC.
Hey, Will again. Just a quick note. This is my co-host Jenny Pachuki, who interviewed Walker. You'll hear Jenny throughout the episode. Okay, back to the studio.
Tell me, how did you get here?
Yeah, well, it was a pretty straight route in some ways. I listened to radio a lot as a kid because my dad, who had gone to Columbia, he had been a music major there, and he loved to listen not just to classical but to jazz. So I grew up actually WRVR listening to jazz radio, and I then started listening to NPR, to WNYC back when I was in high school or college, and just decided I had decided I wanted to be a journalist, but I fell in love with the radio medium, both as an on-air announcer at Wesleyan, where I went to college, and then afterwards in Boston at WGBH, and I just decided I wanted a job in public radio. So I worked as a producer and a host and a reporter at NPR for 3.5 years, and then went up to Carnegie Hall. And then I decided I wanted nothing to do with radio. I wanted to learn something new. It was like, okay, I either was going to continue. I was at Carnegie Hall just doing a show a week, and I couldn't see the end to it. And I thought, it's really interesting to think about management. So I went to business school up at Yale, which was a pretty interesting program in that it was very new at the time, and it was really so much fun. I loved going. I actually loved the business school experience, and I did consulting at Boston Consulting Group, and then decided I wanted to go back to media. and was at Sesame Workshop for a while, and then went to WNYC. They called. They were having this fight with Mayor Giuliani, who wanted to sell the stations, and the listeners and the board said, no, you can't do that. You have to sell it to us. You can't sell it to the highest bidder. You have to sell it to us and keep it independent. So they hired me to kind of make that transition, and I've been here ever since.
On September 11th, 2001, Walker sent her son off to school and then went to vote in the primary election at a local polling place in her Brooklyn Heights neighborhood.
I left to go vote because it was primary day, and with my daughter and our babysitter. My daughter was like 2. And as we were going to vote, I remember passing in Brooklyn Heights. There was a farmer's market. I remember looking at the apples, and I said to the babysitter, could you buy some apples? They're beautiful. I just remember these apples. And I remember that it was the last beautiful thing I saw before somebody came running and said, look up there. A plane just hit the World Trade Center, and there are sparkles coming all around Brooklyn Heights. It was like weird because it was like sparkles coming
glass
across.
From the
it was
building,
glass from the building.
In the paper.
Right. And I went in to vote thinking, I tried to call the newsroom. I couldn't get through. I went in to vote. I voted, and then one of my neighbors came in and said the second plane hit, and it must be terrorism. And so I decided I had to get in because I wanted to make sure that we were going to stay on the air. But I was right by the Brooklyn Bridge because I was voting at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. And so I tried to get across the bridge, and they stopped me, and I didn't have the press credentials, but I stopped a car coming off the bridge full of these women who had been downtown. I don't know, I was kind of like obviously shocked, but I was worried about our antenna, which was on the North Tower. And so I asked them to turn on 93.9. They were so nice. And they turned it on, and it was just static. And I thought, oh, my God. And then I went and I took the subway. I got the last subway in to the city before they stopped it. And I came out right at 1 Center Street, and everyone was just looking up, and you could see the smoke, and people were crying. And then I decided we really needed to be on the air. And so I was walking in as some of the staff was walking out. And then there was another reporter, Amy Eddings, who came in. We went in, and they were evacuating the building. And I said, we have to go up. And the commissioner of DCAS at the time said to me, you can't go up. I said, we have to go up. I said, we're an independent organization. I'm going to make the choices we make. And he said, well, if the city of New York still owned WNYC, I'd order you off the air. And I said, good thing you don't. I went upstairs with a couple of people. We stayed on the air with a group of 5 people. And it was an amazing morning because we were trying to figure out what was going on. We were on the AM station. We were not on the FM station, obviously, because the FM station had, but we thought that we started realizing, because people were calling, that the TVs were all out. And so it was really important to be on the AM station. So we had reporters out because they were out for the primaries. And so they were all out around, and they were calling in. And we still had phone service, and we were putting them on the air. And then we heard Beth Fertig's, incredible tape.
Can you hear this sound right now?
The building is falling right now. People are running through the street. Smoke is everywhere. People are filling Lower Broadway.
She was recording it as she was running uptown. So, we were able to stay on the air and have reporters all around the city calling in. And it took us a while, until about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, to get set up in an alternate location. We were up at the NPR bureau, starting at about 7, I believe. And then I got home after that. We were able to start broadcasting from there. And I left 1 Center Street, and it was, they had closed everything. And the building was, at the site, it was just all this fire. And I remember actually going back during the day, when we first got up, and the entire 1 Center Street was shook when the buildings fell. it was very scary.
You were right there.
We
you
were
were
right
so
there.
close
Right.
in the municipal building. And as I recall, you were pretty high up.
We were on the 24th, 25th, and 26th floors, yeah.
What were some of the difficult decisions that you had to make that day?
Well, it was a difficult decision to decide to stay in the building. I said to the people, you don't have to stay. I'm going to stay so that we can stay on the air. I called the chair of my board and I said, this is the decision I've made. Will you back me up? He said yes. But it was difficult to decide to kind of put your life in danger. And it was also not difficult in a way because as journalists, that's what we're called to do. And there's no time in the history of New York in a way that, New York needed us more than ever because there was no communication and people didn't know what was happening and there was all this stuff happening in Washington and Pennsylvania and so we were and we were able to transmit that information to the public and to also feed the NPR with reports because we were the reporters with the eyes and the ears on the ground, and so we were reporting to NPR, to the whole country, and we were reporting on WNYC.
Because the WNYC studios were in the frozen zone, they couldn't go back. Knowing that New York needed them, Walker and her team scrambled to find a way to remain on air, and the community stepped in to help.
You were in the frozen zone. Your offices were in the frozen zone, so you couldn't return
we could not
there.
Go back, right?
How did you operate?
Yeah.
What did you do?
Well, I mean, we're so lucky to have so many friends here. So, I called somebody at Columbia. They had, it turned out, been building the WKCR studios, the radio station up at Columbia, and they had not yet moved back in to the new studio. So they said, you can come and take our studio, but it has to be wired up. I'm like, that I can solve. I have the best engineers in New York, and they went up and they wired up the studio, and and then we did shows out of there. We did shows, continued some out of NPR. We were at Oxygen Media, Jerry Laybourne, WNET. So we had people all around New York.
The enormous columns of smoke where one of the trade towers used to be.
What was most interesting I think from a journalistic standpoint is obviously people kept reporting and reporting and reporting. The casualties or the non-casualties. The people looking for their families and some incredible stories. And then also opening up the phones to New Yorkers to kind of express their feelings and to feel this sense of community of a place that's not only going to give you the right, well-researched information because there was so much, fear and false information around, but also a community that was trying to come to terms with what just happened to us and how should we cope and, is there more coming,
Listening to some of the broadcasts in the aftermath, there was this sense of call, talk, we're all grieving, let's be together. And New York is one of these places where it's kind of difficult to develop a sense of community because it's so big. But one of the amazing things about WNYC is it creates a sense of community by making everybody aware of it in a personal way. Yeah. And how did you arrive to the decision that was the best approach and that's what New York needed?
It was just... It's the beauty of radio in a sense. You start, and I think the incredible staff here, you start doing it, you realize it works, you realize that's what people need, and you can do more. You don't, you just, and as a public station and one that's, our goal is not to sell the advertising, our goal is to serve people. So we just found that people needed it, and we did more. And the people like Brian Lehrer and Brooke Gladstone and others and Leonard Lopate who were hosting could feel it. And when the phone lines are just lighting up, and people needed to talk and to talk to one another in a way.
As time has gone on, 9/11 continues in some way to be a topic in the news. Not a day passes, really, that you don't hear September 11th mentioned. How have you made decisions about reporting on September 11th, whether that means the anniversaries, the rebuilding of the World Trade Center site? What have you sensed the community needs?
So, I think of that in both the internal sense and the external sense, and they're both the same. I actually, every year, I will bring the staff together to tell them about our history, because it was such a fundamental kind of shift for us in the way that we started seeing ourselves as we are needed more than ever. We have to increase our news department. We have to, we are national producers. Our roots are in New York. People need to hear from us. And it was a huge moment in our time. And the staff was extraordinary the way I think the levels and the quality and the conversation was just, went to a different level. We knew that New York needed us. And that kind of knowing New York, we knew New York needed us when we bought the station, because people were up in arms. But this is when we really knew it in our hearts. And that, I want everyone to feel that. So to listeners, we always try to commemorate the 9/11, and certainly in the first 10 years, I think we had the ceremony from the site and the reading, and we do that now online, and dip in and out, because that is such it's a part of what it means to be looking at 9/11, is to really remember those people.
Is there one story or one moment, a story that you covered or a personal moment that you think back on as resonant and important and formative to you?
I think about the tape of Beth Fertig running from the buildings, because it was so incredibly powerful that I couldn't listen to it actually for several years. But it was also, to me, in a way, both the extraordinary power of radio to bring you to a moment, and an emotional kind of capturing of the fear and the sense of what is happening to our city that you could feel in just that small piece of tape. And I also think about walking into the KCR studios and listening to Brian convening a conversation and feeling like we're going to be okay. New Yorkers will come together. New Yorkers will get stronger. And WNYC has an incredible role to play. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do in the next several years, but we are needed more than ever, and I believe that.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story. I'm Will Thwaites. I host and produce the show alongside Jenny Pachuki. This episode was also produced by Elizabeth Bistro and written by Jenny Pachuki. Our executive producers are Carl Cricco and Michael Frazier. Sound editing is done by Sam Behrens. Special thanks to the team at WNYC for letting us record our interview with Laura Walker in their studios. To be sure you don't miss any new episodes of Our City, Our Story, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, leave us a review. Episodes are also available on Spotify and our website, 911memorial.org.